Paulie Gualtieri spends most of his life acting like respect is a currency you can stack. You earn enough, you kick up enough, you bleed enough, you show up enough, and eventually people are forced to treat you like you matter. That belief is basically his religion. It is why he is so sensitive to slights, why he keeps mental receipts, why he takes it personally when he is left out of a meeting or when somebody laughs a little too hard at his expense. And it is why that one small moment with Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. hits him like a hammer, not because Carmine insults him, or threatens him, or even dismisses him in a dramatic way. It is worse than that. Carmine looks at him like he's not part of the picture at all. When Paulie runs into Carmine at that wedding reception and tries to greet him, he suddenly realizes Carmine has no idea who he is. It is a tiny interaction, almost nothing, but for Paulie it is a full-body humiliation. He has been living with a story in his head, a story where he is known, where his name travels, where the boss of New York has at least some awareness of this tough old soldier from Jersey, and then the air comes out of it. Carmine is not playing the social game with him. Carmine is not pretending they have history. Carmine is simply blank. To understand why that blank look matters so much, you have to understand what Paulie thinks he is. Paulie is not just another earner to himself. In his own mind, he is old school. He came up when things were real. He's been around since Johnny Soprano's era. He's survived internal beefs, wars, indictments, betrayals, changing bosses, changing crews. He's the guy who shows up first and leaves last. He's the guy who takes pride in being a proper gangster, the kind of guy who thinks etiquette and hierarchy are the only things holding the world together. Even when he's being petty or paranoid, he frames it like he's defending standards. So when Carmine doesn't recognize him, it is not just a personal insult. It suggests something much scarier. It suggests Paulie might be exactly what outsiders always implied he was. A small-time guy from a small-time outfit, a face that never mattered outside his own neighborhood. And that fear is already sitting inside Paulie long before he meets Carmine. Season 4 is basically the season where Paulie's insecurity starts leaking out of him in visible ways. He gets pinched in Ohio and spends months locked up, cut off from his usual world. While he's inside, the family keeps moving without him. Ralph is earning. Other guys are positioning themselves. Tony's attention is elsewhere. Paulie, who measures his worth through proximity and status, feels himself sliding. So when Johnny Sack starts talking to him, it feels like oxygen. It feels like New York is looking his way. Johnny doesn't just talk to Paulie like a random Jersey guy. Johnny talks to him like he's valuable, like he's a man with options, like he's somebody Carmine might want. And that detail is crucial, because Paulie's whole emotional engine runs on the idea that the right people are watching. Wikipedia even spells out the dynamic in a blunt way. Johnny tricks Paulie into feeding him intelligence by giving him the impression that Carmine is interested in offering him a spot in the Lupertazzi family. That impression is basically a drug for Paulie. It gives him a fantasy where he is not stuck, not underappreciated, not fading into the background of his own crew. It gives him a fantasy where he can walk away from Tony, or at least make Tony feel the threat of him walking away. So by the time Paulie sees Carmine at the wedding, he's not walking up as some random admirer. He's walking up with an expectation that has been built inside him for months. In his head, this is the moment where the myth becomes real. Maybe Carmine smiles. Maybe Carmine nods like, "Yeah, I know who you are." Maybe Carmine says something casual that confirms Johnny's hints were true. Paulie doesn't even need a big speech. He just needs recognition. A look that says, "You exist in my world." Instead, he gets the opposite. The boss of New York is not playing along, not even accidentally. And that is why Paulie's reaction is so intense, because it instantly reframes everything that came before it. It takes the warm, flattering storyline Johnny offered him and turns it into something colder. Not New York values you, but New York used you. Paulie doesn't just feel embarrassed. He feels played. He feels stupid for believing it. And since Paulie hates feeling stupid more than almost anything, that moment sticks in his chest. Now, what does Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. actually feel about Paulie? The honest answer is the show never gives you a direct window into Carmine's inner thoughts about Paulie specifically, because to Carmine, Paulie probably does not rate as a specific person. Carmine is a boss who operates like a businessman. He is not sentimental, not chatty, not interested in collecting extra relationships unless they serve money and stability. He deals with the top layer. He deals with Tony because Tony is the guy who can make agreements or break them. He deals with Johnny because Johnny is his key executive. He deals with other heavy New York names because they affect his operations. A captain from Jersey, even a captain as long tenured as Paulie, is not automatically somebody Carmine would track closely. So how Carmine felt might literally be indifference, not hatred, not admiration, indifference. The kind of indifference where you don't even realize you're insulting somebody because you're not trying to insult them. You're just not paying attention. And that is exactly the kind of emotional violence that destroys Paulie, because Paulie can handle being hated. He can handle being threatened. He can even handle being disrespected if it feels like a deliberate move in a power game. What he cannot handle is being invisible. But there's another layer here too. Carmine is old school in a different way than Paulie. Paulie's old school thing is mostly about ritual and pride, a personal identity. Carmine's old school thing is about control, about keeping the machine steady, about not letting unnecessary emotional fireworks mess up business. When you look at Carmine through that lens, even his "who is this guy?" energy has logic behind it. If a Jersey guy walks up at a wedding acting like he has a relationship with you, it creates implications. It suggests familiarity. It suggests side channels. It suggests favoritism. A boss like Carmine might not want any of that floating around, especially when his own underboss is known to maneuver and build little alliances. And that brings us to the question you asked directly. Is it possible Carmine recognized Paulie, but acted like he didn't? Yes, it's possible. But the interesting part is not just could he, it's would it benefit him. If Carmine truly did recognize Paulie, acting like he didn't could serve a few purposes. The most obvious one is hierarchy. Carmine might simply be reinforcing the pecking order. Jersey guys can do business, they can earn, they can kick up, but they are not equals. They don't walk into New York social spaces expecting to be treated like insiders. By playing dumb, Carmine would be reminding Paulie that the gap is real. It's a cold lesson. You might be a big deal at home, but up here you're just another face. Another purpose could be internal politics. If Carmine senses that Johnny has been getting too cozy with the Jersey captain, Carmine might want to shut down the illusion without confronting Johnny directly. Carmine doesn't have to accuse Johnny of anything. He doesn't have to ask questions. He doesn't have to create drama. He can simply refuse to validate the relationship. That alone deflates the whole game. It's like taking the battery out of a device. If Paulie can't get even a basic recognition from Carmine, Johnny's flattery loses power. Carmine stays clean, Johnny's maneuvering gets weaker, and Paulie is reminded that access is controlled at the top. There's also something else that fits Carmine's personality. Carmine tends to speak in a way that lets him deny intent later. He's careful. He's the kind of guy who can wound you and still act like you're crazy for feeling wounded. If he did recognize Paulie and still acted like he didn't, he could always shrug it off as confusion, age, distraction, whatever. And that is a very boss-like move. You get the benefit, the message lands, but you maintain plausible deniability. That said, there are strong reasons to believe Carmine genuinely didn't recognize him. First, Carmine's world is huge. He's not running a small neighborhood crew. He's managing a large organization with multiple crews, multiple rackets, multiple problems, and a constant flow of people trying to lick his ring. It is believable that he wouldn't keep track of a New Jersey captain's face, especially if that captain is not the direct point of contact for major deals. Second, Carmine is not shown as a petty guy who enjoys humiliating people for sport. He can be harsh, but his harshness usually tracks back to money and control, not ego games. Third, the show frames the moment as Paulie's awakening. It's not Carmine cleverly put him in his place. It's Paulie finally realizes he's been duped. The emotional point lands cleaner if Carmine's blankness is real. If Carmine truly doesn't know him, then Johnny's manipulation is complete. Paulie wasn't being recruited. He was being milked. And that is where the focus shifts back to Paulie, because the real tragedy of the scene is not Carmine's memory. It is Paulie's need. Paulie does not just want money. He wants to feel valued. He wants to feel chosen. He wants to feel like people see him the way he sees himself. And when Carmine doesn't recognize him, Paulie doesn't just lose face in front of New York. He loses face in front of himself. It forces him to confront a possibility he spends his whole life fighting. Maybe his status is fragile. Maybe his reputation is local. Maybe when the real bosses talk, his name doesn't even come up. That wound helps explain why Paulie becomes so erratic in this stretch. In the same episode, right after this kind of emotional gut punch, he spirals into something ugly. He learns about hidden cash, he breaks into a house, and when he gets caught, he kills a defenseless old woman just to protect himself and take the money dot. If you look at the act on its surface, it's greed and brutality. But if you look at it as Paulie's emotional state, it's also a man trying to take control back. He just got reminded that the big world doesn't even recognize him. So he does something that proves he can still dominate someone. He does something that produces immediate, tangible reward. He does something that makes him feel powerful again, even if it's the smallest, nastiest kind of power. That's Paulie in a nutshell. When he feels small, he makes someone else smaller. And once you see it that way, the Carmine moment becomes one of the cleanest little character traps in the whole show. Paulie thinks he's being respected by the biggest people. Paulie thinks he's building a future. Paulie thinks he's finally being appreciated the way he deserves. Then he meets the top of that world and gets a blank stare. The show is basically saying, this is what your life looks like from the top. Your noise, your labor. You're a tool somebody uses to get information, and once you stop being useful, you disappear. What's even more brutal is how perfectly it exposes the difference between Paulie and Tony. Tony, for all his insecurity, understands power in a more realistic way. Tony doesn't need Carmine to recognize his captains. Tony needs Carmine to respect his position at the table. Tony is not trying to be adopted by New York. Tony is trying to do business with New York. Paulie, on the other hand, wants emotional validation from New York. He wants a father figure's nod. And Carmine, the most father figure boss in that world, refuses to give it, either because he can't or because he won't. So how does Paulie feel about Carmine after that? He probably feels three things at once. He feels shame because he approached with warmth and got nothing back. And shame is dangerous for Paulie because it turns into anger fast. He feels betrayal, not necessarily by Carmine, but by the whole fantasy. The idea that he mattered to Carmine is revealed as a lie, and that makes him question his own judgment. And he feels fear, because if Carmine doesn't know him, then the world is bigger than Paulie can control. It means Paulie's safety, his leverage, his supposed options, might all be imaginary. From that point on, Paulie's relationship with Tony snaps back into place, not because Paulie suddenly becomes enlightened, but because reality closes in. The show even notes that by the end of that season he realizes he was duped and devotes himself to Tony. It's not a noble return. It's a return to the only place where his name actually means something. And what about Carmine's side of it, in that broader sense? If Carmine truly didn't recognize Paulie, then Carmine's feeling about Paulie is basically the feeling a CEO has about a mid-level manager from a small partner company. Not contempt, not admiration, just distance. Carmine doesn't need Paulie. Carmine needs Tony to keep the Jersey business flowing and Johnny to manage the New York machine. Paulie is replaceable. Carmine's world is built on replaceable parts. If Carmine did recognize Paulie and chose to act like he didn't, then Carmine's feeling is colder but still practical. It would mean Carmine sees Paulie as an opportunity to send a message without starting a war. A reminder of scale. A reminder of rank. A reminder that no matter how many envelopes you kick up, the top still decides who matters. Either way, the end result is the same for Paulie. The meeting makes him feel small, and when Paulie feels small, he either tries to buy his way back into importance, or he tries to punish someone for making him feel that way. Sometimes, he does both. That's why this scene is so memorable even though it's not an action scene. It's not a sit-down. Nobody gets threatened. Nobody gets whacked. It's just a man walking up to another man and realizing the universe he imagined for himself is not real. And in a show that constantly strips away glamour, that might be one of the most honest mafia moments of all. The foot soldiers spend their lives acting like they're part of history. The bosses at the top barely remember their names. So when you ask, how did it make Paulie feel? The answer is simple and ugly. It made him feel like he could die tomorrow, and the most powerful people in his world wouldn't even know they lost him. And for a guy like Paulie, who has built his entire identity around being a respected piece of the machine, that kind of invisibility is basically spiritual death.